AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
All right, 25 minutes before 11 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. It never ceases to, I don't want to say amaze me. That's not what I mean. It never ceases to interest me, I guess. World War II stories, for some reason, always interest me. I never heard about this next one before. If you look at the map, now this is going to seem really juvenile or like elementary school thinking, but you look at the map, Japan's so small, right? China is so gigantic, right? Mm-hmm. How could China ever be at the mercy of Japan, right? Well, that's not the way the world works, of course. In World War II, there were some pilots who helped out China from Japan, and we hadn't even engaged in war yet. This is before Pearl Harbor, right? Mm-hmm. Sam Kleiner is on the phone. He's an historian. He's also an attorney, by the way. In case I say something wrong, he can take me to court. He's a contributor to the LA Times, the Foreign Policy, the Atlantic, and the book is called The Flying Tigers, The Untold Story of the American pilots who waged a secret war against Japan. Good morning, Sam. Thank you for being on. It's an honor to have you on the show.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me on.
Where are you?
I'm currently in New York City.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and this is not the same group of people, correct, as like the Doolittle story that we heard?
No, it's separate. So this actually, happens before the Doolittle raid. But to give you some context, I wrote this book over the course of the past couple of years. My grandfather was a navigator on a B-25 in the Pacific, and I'd always been very interested in World War II and trying to, from my grandfather, hearing stories about the war. And when I was in graduate school, I got very interested in this period right around the beginning of the war, because there's just so much fascinating stuff going on. You have this big isolationist America First movement, and then you have, the desire to help the Allies. And what I found was this incredible story called The Flying Tigers, who were a group of around 300 Americans who were sent over on a covert action before Pearl Harbor to assist the Chinese in their fight against the Japanese. And I started getting into it and just realized there weren't any good books on this incredible story. There's the Flying Tigers movie, the famous Shark-Face P-40 that listeners might have seen, but this is the first time the real human story of that unit has been told.
Wow. And who sent them? Who were they under the orders of?
It's a great question. So this is a mix. This is basically like a covert action where they're sent over at the behest of the Roosevelt administration, and they were under the orders of Chiang Kai-shek, the Chinese premier. But the real story is kind of focused on who these pilots were and what their stories were. So I'm writing about the leader of the group, Claire Chenault, who became a famous military leader in his own right, who's basically a former Army stunt pilot from Louisiana, who's gone over and he's been fighting with a group of mercenaries in China going as far back as 1937. And so a lot of this is happening before Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
And then they're in place in the Far East right after Pearl Harbor and score the first decisive victories against the Japanese in the wake of, the terrible devastation of Pearl Harbor and a series of losses across the Pacific. And they help to rally Americans that we can and will win this war.
Was Pearl Harbor in part response to this?
It's a great question. Pearl Harbor kind of arose out of a real breakdown in relations between the U.S. and the Japanese. But the Japanese were certainly very upset with American pilots who had been fighting in China going as far back as 1937, and that caused a lot of diplomatic friction. I write in 1938 about how one pilot from Seattle was basically captured by the Japanese, and they threatened to execute him. and that certainly wasn't a good situation. So there's a lot of fascinating stuff in here about the pilots and about the politics of the era. And at the end of the day, it's an incredible adventure story, and you get to go along with these young men and some women on this journey. And what I did was collect, traveling across the country over the course of a couple of years, collecting diaries, combat reports, letters, photographs that had never been seen before, and assembling them into this narrative. So you really get to hear from their own voices.
Sorry. Go ahead, Rob.
And it seemed like the family members, they were able to get close to you and want to share their stories of their flying tigers.
Yeah, absolutely. There are still these reunions that are going on where the family members get together and talk about the memory of their of their family, generally their fathers who were in this unit. And I was able to go to a couple of those and kind of was welcomed as a historian to help record the story. And I met a gentleman named Frank Lazonsky, who's the last surviving flying tiger. He lives down in Columbus, Georgia. And when I met him in 2015, I made a promise to him that I was going to write the true story of that unit. And just a couple weeks ago, I was able to go down to Georgia to see him and give him a copy of the book and tell him that I had kept that promise. So it's just wonderful to see Frank, 97 years young, and he's enjoying the book.
Wow. So you approach this story from the human side. We get to learn the personalities behind this, right?
Absolutely, that's really what the goal is. And so, for instance, there's a young pilot from Winter Garden, Florida, named George McMillan, who I write a lot about, and he wrote these incredible letters home to his family and kept a diary of his adventure. And those documents were in a small museum in Winter Garden.
Wow.
So that those kind of stories really help to humanize this incredible adventure, and you get to live it alongside them.
I have maybe a political, logistical kind of a question, because if we weren't at war, how did these guys justify fighting on foreign soil? How did they, in their own minds, how did they deal with that?
Well, for most of these guys, this was an incredible adventure. These were a lot of these were children of the Great Depression. Frank Lazonsky, the last surviving tiger, talks about growing up and in Depression era Detroit and having to go down to the train tracks to pick up scraps of coal to heat their home. So these were guys who didn't come from means, and then suddenly they were being offered a lot of money to go to the Far East and join this conflict. And this was you had to be a little bit of an adventurer to want to become an Army or Air Force or a Navy pilot in the first place, and so they joined up. And from the Roosevelt administration's perspective, Roosevelt talked about America being the arsenal of democracy and trying to help Great Britain and China where we could, which were already at war with the Axis powers. And that even before Pearl Harbor, really trying to do whatever we could to help them. And in China, that took the form of this, kind of secret air force that was sent over.
Wow.
What were the ages of the men who were in the Flying Tigers?
They were mostly men in their 20s, so these were very young guys, and many of them tragically didn't make it home. I read about a number of the pilots who, Americans would get to know these pilots intimately because their exploits were on the front page of the papers. So you have guys like Scarsdale Jack Newkirk from outside New York City, and when he was killed in March 1942, that became really a national story. And so you kind of get a real sense of the appreciation the American public had for these guys. Obviously, with their very distinctive shark-faced planes, there was a real sense of awe about these guys. And most Americans couldn't pinpoint Kunming or Rangoon on a map, but that didn't matter because just in that very dark period after Pearl Harbor, we really needed some victories to our name, and these guys delivered.
Wow. Who were their targets? Were they targeting ammunitions depots, things like that? Who were they shooting at or bombing?
Well, for basically since 1937, the Japanese had been waging a massive bombardment campaign against Chinese cities, and most of China had been lost, and so they were really in these couple remaining cities like Kunming and Chongqing that were in the south. And so one of their main missions were were to stop the bombardment of those cities. So you have, the first battle is December 20th, 1941, and the Japanese have been bombing Kunming for years, but they shoot down a number of Japanese bombers during that raid.
Oh, I see.
So it's just an incredible story, and you know, on that raid, one of the guys crash lands and spends a night in a Chinese village. So you get to see, you know, just all kinds of fascinating parts of the story.
Okay, so their mission was defensive in nature. They weren't. They were trying to stop the offensive in China.
Yes, that's right. And then they also ended up taking up certain, offensive raids. So some of their greatest exploits were taking on raids against Japanese positions that were throughout Southeast Asia.
And where was
so you really see a wide?
And where was their base?
So they were based mostly in Kunming, China, which is one of the main cities of what was then, the remaining part of Free China. And so they it was very exotic for a lot of these guys. They, a lot of these guys, from the Midwest had never left the state they grew up in before, and suddenly they find themselves in Kunming.
Is that part of what attracted you to it? Also, was what? Were you living through their eyes in a way when you heard their stories?
Absolutely, and I think that I grew up in Arizona. I didn't really travel a lot as a kid, and you suddenly see these stories of these guys who are kind of, you can really live through that adventure. There's one guy a pilot from Iowa, and when he gets on the ship to cross over the Pacific, he writes about how this is the first time that he's been on a body of water bigger than one of the lakes back home. So you really do get to see a wide array of different kinds of experiences.
The book is called The Flying Tigers. Sam Kleiner is the author, and he's our guest. It just arrived this morning, and so I haven't had a chance to read it. I was reading about it, though, and one of the things I wanted to point out is that it's currently #1 on Amazon in the Japanese history category. Where did I see it was #2 in the Japan category, as opposed to Japanese history, where it's #1. Isn't that interesting? And it's #4 in the China category, and #10 in the aviation category. So you've got a hit book in several different categories, and the book is not even a month old, right?
Yeah, it's just under a month old, and obviously we think this makes for a great gift for Father's Day or graduation for those of you who are looking for good stuff. And it's been such a pleasure it's been the pleasure of a lifetime to be able to tell this story, and really glad that it's resonating with people. And I think that Americans are hungry for stories about these kind of narratives about this is a unit. You've got guys from all over the country, from all different kind of walks of life. You've got guys who went to Yale and NYU and Princeton. You also have guys who had much more hardscrabble backgrounds, and they all kind of work together as a cohesive whole. And so I think that's really one of the messages that I've been trying to stress about the book, and why I think it matters today. Is it's really a book about something we can learn from, about how these guys work together and just saw themselves as part of a bigger whole.
And what we learned about it in your book was that the U.S. government couldn't come right out and say that they were doing this operative, that they created something else to make this a covert plan where the American people and even the enemies didn't know that the U.S. government was involved in the strike force, even though they were.
Absolutely. So yeah, there was definitely an aspect of a clandestine operation with secret front companies that were set up to kind of make this all work. So you have a lot of different kind of narratives built in there.
If we could have had somebody do what you have done to tell us about the personal stories behind any of the previous wars, I think World War II might be the first one where we start doing that. You don't know a whole lot of personal stories from the First World War, the Civil War, anything behind and further back in time. All you know is the facts and figures of the casualties and the political gain and loss. And I think what this does, for me anyway, is it helps it make sense. If you try to say how is it possible that a guy would fly all the way to China to fight? Well, it makes sense the way you've said it and what they've gone through. is really human. I mean, you really can relate to it.
Absolutely, yeah. It's been such a great story to be able to capture.
You tell about Madame Ching.
So I read about her, and she was kind of an informal leader of the group. And she really took on a major role in helping to inspire the men to keep fighting. So a lot of them had very fond memories of her, and she was, of course, the wife of the premier, but also had a very important role in shaping China's destiny. So you learn a lot about China through reading the war, but at its core, it's a great adventure story.
Are there other female stories? In other words, the men usually in war scenes usually have some need for female companionship. Did they have access to women?
Like nurses or something?
Yeah, you know what I mean.
It's a great question. Actually, one of the first things I found when I was researching the book were a collection of love letters between a pilot and a pilot and a nurse who were in the unit, told the story of a young nurse named Emma Foster who was with the unit and really had an incredible experience, falling in love with one of the pilots, getting married. And I won't give away what happens to them, but it becomes a major part of the story.
Oh my gosh! Did any of the research or interviews you did or reading that you did reveal things to family members that they didn't know themselves?
Yeah, I've had a lot of conversations with families in the past month, just talking about the stuff that I found. They, a lot of them, they haven't had the chance to go track down a lot of this stuff. So it's really great, and to be able to connect with them about that.
Isn't it amazing how much the world has changed since then? It's just so different now, and yet the same in many ways. I think one of the big differences today from then is that today we don't know necessarily who the enemy is. I mean, the terrorist organizations don't wear uniforms, so. And you can't even pin it on a country, because a lot of times the country is besides themselves as to what to do about it. Their own, little groups of people that are trying to rule the world. You've done an amazing job with this book. Did you have fun making it or writing it?
Yeah, it's been just the pleasure of a lifetime to be able to tell this story.
And what is really wonderful that comes out of your book is that everybody, all of the participants, they feel they have a purpose in life, and that really underscores their love of country and their love of family.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a really great. There's a lot of really great stories packed in there, and I hope that listeners check it out. You can find more at flyingtigersbook.com, and the book is available wherever books are sold, including on Amazon.
Are any of the airplanes in the Smithsonian or on display anywhere?
Yeah, you can find a copy of the airplane at the Dulles Air and Space Museum, the Smithsonian one that's out by Dulles Airport in Washington, and there's a couple scattered around the country, so you can definitely find them in different places.
What kind of message does a book like yours give to the young people of their generation today who are turning 18 and 19?
It's a great question. I think it says, my hope is that, we do a better job of appreciating our own history. These guys are very well remembered in China. They're kind of, when they go back to visit, they were swarmed in the streets, and kind of, there's huge museums dedicated to them. And I think that we should do a better job of remembering them here as well. And so that, is something I hope that, we can carry forward. So that's the main hope that I have with this book, is that a new generation can connect with this story, which was quite popular in a certain era and just has kind of died off. There was the 1970s TV show Bob Black Sheep that was about Pappy Boyington, who was one of the pilots who started with the Flying Tigers. But I think a lot of that has has kind of died off. And so I think it's important that we kind of resuscitate that history.
Was it politically risky for Roosevelt to do this, considering we weren't, nobody had declared war?
Yeah, I mean, he was facing a very isolationist Congress, and that certainly was very politically risky, and there was definitely a sense, that this was definitely stepping outside the lines of what Congress was allowing and outside of international law, which definitely heightened the sense of drama around the whole thing.
And that seems to be one of your loves, was to find out about the different presidents and how they would make a decision to go to war.
Yeah, I ever since a kid, have been interested in presidential history. It's what I wrote my doctorate on at Oxford, and I think there's some really, you look at the decisions that the Roosevelt administration, you see just a lot of pressure to, on the one side to kind of keep Congress and a fairly isolationist public happy, but Roosevelt was very committed to doing what he could to aid the Allies. So, this is history that's 75 years old, but feels very relevant. It's about, how do we make decisions about war and peace? And it, the foreign policy implications are still with us, because we set up a certain kind of policy that allowed us.
Sam Kleiner, Sam is our guest, and The Flying Tigers is his book. Let me squeeze in a phone call if you don't mind, Sam. Good morning. Thank you for calling. You're on the air with Sam Kleiner.
Yeah, this is Mike. I was just wondering, as I'm listening to him, I understand now why the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. I had no idea that the United States was carrying on bombing actions against Japan for China back in World War II.
Yeah.
I'm one of the last of the Tuskegee Airmen, and there's been a lot of stories and movies and everything made about the Flying Tigers, but I've never heard it in this depth before. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, people had just met with Roosevelt. He was still in the air as the attack was going on. Did you address any of the actions that Roosevelt took to invite the Japanese to attack Pearl Harbor? I'm going to hang up and listen to your comments.
Oh my gosh! Yeah, thank you for the call. Wow, Sam, you need to do a book on the Tuskegee Airmen. There, right there, you got an interview or interviewee. I mean,
yes.
That's incredible. Yeah, the Tuskegee Airmen are another one of the incredible stories from World War II. So we really appreciate your call. It's really an honor to have you connect in with the story, and I have a great reverence for the Tuskegee Airmen as well. So there's definitely a lot to be learned from the history of the different units in that generation. I
have a copy of the book, and normally I put it up for grabs, but to the gentleman who just called, the book is yours. I don't know how I'm going to know who you are, but if you can call in like in a minute or so after we get off the air, Robin will put your name on the book. It's called The Flying Tigers. Sam Kleiner wrote the book, and I found it on Amazon. It's getting really good reviews. It's number one in a couple of categories. And you did give us a website earlier. Could you repeat that again?
Yeah, it's flyingtigersbook.com, and I'll add when that gentleman, if he calls back, I'd love to send him a signed copy of the book if I can personalize it, because we just are so grateful to all of the servicemen from that generation and from all time, but especially groups like the Tuskegee Airmen. So we hope that listeners check out The Flying Tigers: The Untold Story for Father's Day.
Well, Sam, thank you for that offer. Let me let you stay on the air after we get off, and you can tell Robin a way to get in touch with you, so when the gentleman calls back, she can send that information to you, okay?
Thank you.
All right, don't go away. We'll take a little break. Be right back.
The College of Central Florida is committed to being your first choice for quality higher education. CF has locations in Marion, Citrus, and Levy counties and offers more than 60 academic programs. Earn a certificate, associate, or bachelor's degree. With Florida's 2+2 program, a student can complete an associate in arts at CF and be guaranteed admission to a state of Florida university. CF is ranked number 13 in the U.S. for affordability, is military friendly, and offers a full student life experience. Make CF your first choice. Call 352-873-5800.
Fox News Radio, I'm Chris Foster. The They're staying in different hotels less than a half mile from each other. Then President Trump and the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un meet face-to-face in the morning Singapore time this evening here.
Following President Trump's one-on-one meeting with Kim Jong-un, the U.S. delegation at the expanded bilateral meeting will include Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, Chief of Staff John Kelly, and National Security Advisor John Bolton. The White House confirming that President Trump will meet with the media after his historic summit with Kim before departing for the U.S. tomorrow night.
Fox's John Decker in Singapore. The Supreme Court rules the state of Ohio can kick people off the voter rolls who have not voted recently and do not mail back a return card asking if they still wish to be registered. The decision was 5-4, the 5 being the court's more conservative justices. Some other states also use voter inactivity as a trigger to clear people from the rolls. Fox News. We report, you decide.
Ever wonder why Miller High Life is called the champagne of beers? Because it's a flavorful, easy-drinking beer with a perfect storm of tiny champagne-like bubbles. And it's been that way since 1903.
If you've got the time,
welcome to the High Life.
We've got the beer, Miller Beer.
2018 Miller Brewing Company, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Drink High Life responsibly.
When posting on most job sites, you get candidates.
I'm the sales director.
I'm the sales
director you're looking for.
But when you post on Indeed.com, you get the candidates just right for you.
I'm a sales director with an MBA, over 10 years experience, who's also fluent in Japanese.
With Indeed, you can add screener questions for a less time-consuming route to your short list of qualified candidates.
Arigato.
Hiring's better when you've got your short list. Save time on hiring when you post a job on Indeed. Get started today at Indeed.com/hire.
Council.
Menopause the Musical, the off-Broadway parody hit that will have you cheering at your seat and dancing in the aisles. It's impossible not to laugh. The New York Times. It's hilarious. Go see it. The View. Women need this. The Today Show. Featuring Cindy Williams from Laverne and Shirley. June 27th to July 1st. Get tickets now at strasscenter.org. You don't want to miss this.
I'm having a hot flash.